Hi and welcome to the Editing Masterclass. We're here with Eleanor Adler. Eleanor Adler is working as a trainee assistant editor in TV and film. She has worked on Roadkill, a 4-part series, and has recently worked on Temple. We are delighted to have her here as part of this Editing Masterclass. Just a quick introduction, we're all going to go around and talk about and say who we are and what part we're in, so just in case anyone's watching, sort of clarifies things for people. So I'm Fabs and I'm the producer.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm the assistant director.
I'm Sasha, assistant producer.
Darius, and I'm the editor.
And then obviously we have Eleanor.
So first question is, when did you know that you wanted to be an editor or even kind of just work in the film industry in general?
That is a good question. I think it's very different for everyone. For me, I was in school, but I wasn't like, I know exactly what I want to do. I know I want to be an editor, but I just found out that I quite liked it. I thought it was interesting. Didn't particularly want to be on sets. That all sounds very stressful. And so I started finding out more about editing and just as an interest and going to the cinema more often, going to the BFI Future Film Labs, which is now the BFI Film Academy Labs, and they're the 16 to 25-year-olds, teaching you different masterclasses about film over each month to do a different topic, and they were great, and I loved that. And so then I started working on some more short films and thought, oh, this could be quite interesting. This might be something I want to find out more about. Maybe a career, don't know. How on earth do you get in? No idea. We'll give it a go. And so then in sixth form, I decided to brave actually just going straight into the industry instead of going to university. And that's what's happened.
And what was your first job in the industry? What was kind of your break into it?
My first job was a job as a post-production runner, and that's kind of the entry-level job in editing and post-production, and that involves making teas and coffees and looking after lots of different editing suites, but it's a great training ground for just being aware of the industry because you're working in post-production houses. And I was working in London, and in post-production houses, for example, like Technicolor or there's so many different post-production houses, and many TV shows are cut at post-production houses. Some of them are cut and edited by the company's own staff, but mostly what happens in terms of actually editing the show and cutting the picture, which is what I wanted to do, actually making the story. People use the rooms and they rent the rooms in post-production houses. So as runners, you are immediately in an environment where there'll be lots of different editors who are working in the rooms within your company, and that was my first job in the industry.
That's really interesting. And you mentioned about going to the BFI and stuff. Are there any kind of top tips that you would give to people looking to get into the industry? Would you kind of advocate for just kind of going straight for it, or do you say most people go to kind of film school or learn about that kind of thing?
I think most people go to university or film school. I've seen quite a few more people kind of taking the same route as I did of going straight in, but there's no one way to do it, and doing it this way isn't wrong and this way isn't right. There's so many different ways, and so many people that I speak to have done things completely differently. There's a post-production assistant, which is similar to a post-production runner. They just work in slightly different genres of TV and film. And his name's Mark, and he has worked for 40 years at Sainsbury's in retail, and has now decided to transition and change his career, which is just amazing. So there's no one way of doing things, and I think you just have to go with whatever's best for you. And that's what I did, and I just preferred going in this way because I liked learning on the job and being quite excited by the whole idea that it was a challenge, which is probably not a good thing. But yeah, I've really enjoyed coming in this way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And now you're a trainee assistant editor. What exactly does that entail, and what would kind of like an average day in your life, working day, look like?
So I work in TV drama, as Fabian said. I've worked on Roadkill and Temple, which I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to be part of that team. I love working on the shows. And so, as I mentioned, I started off as a post-production runner, and that was my first job in the industry. And then you can either, there's not an either or, but one way of doing things is to stay at your post-production house and become an edit assistant, which is strangely and very confusingly not the same thing as being an assistant editor. Your edit assistant and assistant editor, not the same role. Who came up with that? No idea, because I found it so confusing. And so edit assistants is like the next step up within a post-production house, and they are permanently employed by the company. And please let me know if I'm not making any sense, because I found it really hard to understand. So you could be a runner, and then you can be an edit assistant within a post-production company, and you will be working on all the shows that come into the post-production house, because you're working for the post-production house, you are employed by them. Whereas if you want to get into drama and the picture side of drama, which is the offline edit, because the people who are working on actually crafting the story together, when you shoot and you get all of the rushes and you do the picture edit, that's the offline edit, and then it will get sent on to the online edit, which is basically once you've got your locked edit, you will send it off, and so no more picture is getting edited, hopefully. And what will happen is all of the online editors will go with your picture, and they'll start painting out things that aren't meant to be there. So it's all this kind of like making it look nicer, making it look better. It's all of, so it's not actually cutting the scenes together. So I wanted to do all the cutting the scenes together type work, which is the offline edit. And so if you'd like to go into that in drama, you kind of have to jump out of being a post-production runner and being employed by a company, because all of the people who are working on the picture side of things, so all the people who are credited as editors, assistant editors on things like The Crown or Roadkill or Temple or Bridgerton or anything, they are all freelancers. And so we are not employed by a company. We're kind of employed not on a permanent basis, but we're employed by the production company of the TV show for that TV show, and then we have to go and find another job. And so a trainee assistant editor is kind of the entry level, or edit trainee is the entry level position in the picture offline editing department. And then you can go up, so you can go up to second assistant editor, and you can go up to first assistant editor then. And I wasn't aware of any of these roles before, so that was a whole like, what? And so then you can go up, and then you'll become an editor. And so it takes a very long time to actually become an editor.
How long would that be, to just out of curiosity, because I didn't know.
Yeah,
that's just like,
I know, it's like, what?
How long would that take if you were, say, I mean, you're now going to be like, this metric doesn't make sense, but say you were working for The Crown or something like that, being an editor on The Crown, how long would that take to get there?
That is a very good question. I think everyone's different. Some examples of things that are people's actual careers. There was a woman who worked on a TV series who was an edit trainee, and then the TV show you might be working on the TV show for 6 months, because once it's broadcast, there's no more work to do, so you have to go and find another job. So you could be doing like 6 months working on TV show, you'd be an edit trainee, then you grow your skills, but you're not quite ready to progress up to and get a promotion to like second assistant editor, so you might do another 6 months as an edit trainee, and then the next one, okay, well, maybe you're slightly more ready to be in a second assistant, you get in a second assistant job, but if there's second assistant jobs going around, or you might just carry on as a trainee, so then you can start as a second, and then maybe do 2 jobs as a second, or 3 or 4, or how everyone's completely different, because stepping up to first assistant editor is a very big jump, because they are the head of the assistants team, and it's a career in its own right, and some people actually wish to be a first assistant editor for their whole career, because that's what they want to do and they don't actually want to become editors. And so then it's a massive jump between being a first assistant editor as the head of the assistants, you've made it there, to then being an editor, and there's a couple of roles in between. But someone who worked as a trainee progressed extremely fast, and within like 1 year she became a first assistant editor. Whereas for example me, I'd like to carry on learning, because I feel like I'd like to, there's so much to learn. I'd like to just carry on learning as a trainee for a while. And so mine might be longer, but someone else's will be shorter, and someone else's will be longer, and yeah, it can really depend. But editors will have a great deal of years of experience under their belt.
Mm-hmm. It sounds very collaborative, and I think maybe generally people think that editing isn't as creative as other roles in TV and film. Would you say that that's true, or is there definitely a creative aspect to it?
There definitely is, because you've got your assistant editors and then and editors, and their roles are very different. So for example, editors will be actually cutting the scenes together and cutting the picture together, and they'll receive all of the scenes from the assistants, because what will happen, so for example, an actual day in the life of just like a cutting room, I suppose, would be, we, as the shoot is filming, there might be like 90 days of filming depending on the TV show, and so it's quite constant. So you're receiving the rushes from set in the morning or the day after, and then on that day the assistants and the trainee assistant editor will help the assistants with anything they need. That's the job of a trainee, is to learn and grow your skills, and to be able to carry out tasks independently and just help the first assistant and the second assistant editor with anything they need. And so the assistants will prepare the rushes and then give them to the editor, and then the editor will start assembling scenes, and everyone kind of needs to keep up with the shoot. And so Wednesday's rushes will come in on Thursday, Thursday's rushes will come in on Friday, and we need to keep up with what's happening, so that by the end of the week the editor will be able to send an assembly of the week to the directors and the producers and everyone. And so the editor is doing an extremely creative job, because they are assembling, whereas the assistant editors are doing a much more technical role. But there are also opportunities for the first assistant and possibly the second, depending on how many people are in the team and whether there is a second assistant. You might just have a first and a trainee. It's all very dependent on people and the budget, because everyone needs salaries, so you need, how much money have you got to hire on your team. So there will be opportunities for the first assistant to carry out editing tasks if the editor allows it. So for example, the editor might need sound effects, and so they might say, oh, hello, first assistant, I need some sound effects, can you please go and find some sound effects? And so I can then put them into the episode, because I'm super busy doing other things, and so I'd really like to do that. Or the first assistant might also have a opportunity to assemble scenes as well, because if the editor is really busy doing everything else and might be cutting like 2 episodes at the same time or something, then they need more help, and so that is up to them whether they'd like to pass some tasks down. And so yes, editing would also involve, once you're out of the rushes and into the fine cut before you lock the picture, it's very collaborative, because you have to work with the director and the producer, and I'll be on the other side of the wall and hear the editors and everyone chatting and going, what about this, and this, and very creatively trying to craft the story together. So editing is it's a myth, it's a bit of a myth, but it is a very creative role.
No, that's really cool to hear how kind of varied it is as well. Was it specifically that drew you to editing as opposed to other roles in film? Was it kind of the fact that there is so much variety? Or
Part of it was me looking at set and just being like, no, I'm fine. But really what it was I loved the idea of being creative, and I really liked the idea of progressing up in the industry and starting out as a trainee and learning. And I did computer science at GCSE, so I kind of like the techie side, and I like the idea of crafting the story, and actually how that looks, and being able to, because the edit is kind of the final rewrite of the film, and it's crowd gathering everything everyone's put so much hard work into and actually making it work together. Because before you go into the edit, you just have loads and loads of shots on a camera that are completely in the wrong order and everything, because people often shoot in by location. So for TV shows, they might do well, there's this scene from episode 1 which is in the same location as the scene in episode 2. Okay, we'll shoot those scenes back to back on the same day, and so it's the work of the cutting room and the assistants and the editors to gather all of that, and then the editor to actually craft the story and then collaborate with all the directors and producers.
It's amazing. I've definitely learned so much about of the editor and the production companies, and it's amazing, and the post-production companies too. So now we have kind of like a editing for dummies section where all of us non-editors are going to ask you all of our not silly questions. So I was wondering, as editor or as trainee assistant editor, how much do you use the script? Like, when you look at the script stylistically, how do you interpret it and bring that into your editing?
For my trainee work, we, because of the tasks we're doing and we're not cutting the show, we'll use the script in different ways, which would be to troubleshoot things and to understand what's happening in the script, and perhaps which would also go for the editor as well. And in terms of if I was actually editing a short film, I would, so not a massive TV show, but just for me and my experience of short films in terms of being an editor, when I'm reading a script, when I prepared earlier, very smooth, not at all. So I will go through and I will think about what's in the script and try and visualize it in my head of how I want it to cut together. And I think when you're reading a story in a book, and you've got all the pictures going around your head, I think it's that really, of just being like, well, how do I think this would look? And I also go, this is a short film I worked on called Mechanical, and I also go through and highlight things and put little tabs along the side of things that I might need to know about. For example, we had a lot of voiceover, and so in the edit, as the editor, I might need to actually make temporary voiceover or temporary VFX or temporary sound effects and things. And so anything that I just kind of need to know about. And if I was doing a short film, I'd also create scene cards of all the different scenes and print them out. Even though everyone's been trying to convince me to use online like cards on I can't. I don't know how you all feel about it, but it just doesn't work. I can't use it. And so I print it out, and then once the rushes actually come in, what I do is actually screenshot something that I feel, just a screenshot of a frame that reminds me of the scene, and then I'll put it on the scene card, and I'll end up with we did this on Benson. I worked with Hannah on, and we cut out different scenes, and we had them on the wall, and myself and Zoe, the director, were looking at them going, okay, well, this is act 1 of the short film, and this is act 2 of the short film, and these are all our scenes. And you can just look at it and go, no, that doesn't work, that needs to move, this needs to change, this needs to, just because you can kind of visualize what's happening. And a friend of mine said to me that Act 1 should be, in terms of the duration of the film, Act 1 should be 25%, Act 2 should be 50%, and Act 3 should be 25%. And so I then we all both looked at the scene cards on a wall, and we're just thinking, okay, well, this is obviously too long, and so then this can move over here. And it helps you kind of understand, and when you're reading a script, in terms of what the audience is feeling, like, what do they need to know, and what do they need to know now, and does this make sense? And so when you're looking at the scenes, there might be a scene that when you're structuring things, or if it's, say, really long and unfortunately you have to remove a scene or remove some dialogue, it will allow you to think, okay, well, this is really important and the audience really needs to know about A for B to happen later on. And so you can see how it's all coming together and make sure that the audience has got everything they need to know.
That's so helpful. That's such a really helpful way to structure the edit in the film and things like that. And speaking of your collaboration with Zoe and with the director, how much as an editor of like a short film, how much creative freedom do you have? How much of your own spin can you put on the film?
Zoe was lovely to work with, and I think the ideal situation, which Zoe, very lovely, was amazing at, was how we were a team, and so we'd collaborate together. And so thankfully, and it was just like a lovely experience, we had a great time in the edit, looking at all our scene cards, going, what do you think about this, and what do you think about this? And I think the best director editor relationships are partnerships, where the director is able to listen to the editor and feels as though they'd like to hear their points, and that the editor can express things and also listen to the director's idea and interpret what they'd like to do, because Zoe and I worked really well together, because Zoe would say an idea and I can see where she's going with it, because after a while of working with someone, you kind of get to know how their brain works a bit. So I knew what she wanted, and so then before she was going to ask for it, I then did it, and then she looks at it and was like, oh yeah, no, that's exactly it, that's great. So yeah, it's really great, and I think to work with people that you've worked with before, and just learn, like, developing those relationships is really great as well.
So lovely. Specifically for like a short film and in terms of budget, do you have any tips for if you have like a small budget, and what would you prioritize if you were in charge in terms of editing software and things like that?
I know that a lot of the short films I've worked on, and a lot of short films in general, it's very hard to find a budget, and so it's brilliant that for your film Swim there's a budget there that's great. And in terms of editing, I think the things to think about would be music, and if you need to pay for music or sound effects, and how much they cost in a library, because on TV shows a 1 minute piece of music can cost something like $5,000. So it's so expensive, so obviously we're not paying $5,000, we can leave that's totally fine, but just thinking about kind of costs that might come in post-production. In terms of software, it would be lovely if the production paid for editing software, but I don't know if that's normally done, but I suppose it's up to you. So it'd be more the elements that need to be purchased to go into the film, I think. Be helpful.
Is there ever a point where you would kind of interject in the pre-production stage and just give some advice to make it easier for you for when you do edit?
Yeah, in terms of all of the things that like, for example, the things that I kind of flag for myself when I'm reading the script for the first time. So that the first time I read the script, I just read it, because I'm just trying to read it just to understand what's happening. And I think putting too many things in your head will be like, oh god, okay, we'll check for VFX, check for this, and check when you just want to know if you like the script. And so the second time when I do my flags, I will also just write down any questions that I've got for the director to ask in pre-production, because sometimes there'll be a thing that you think would be really great and that would help the story in terms of another shot, that would help, and so you can discuss that with the director. And in terms of music or sound effects and things like that, anything that you've, or like working with a composer, I think bringing everyone on at a similar time to actually have discussions in pre-production will just make the film better on the other end, because then you can preempt what's going to happen and start having those conversations so that you can all collaborate together.
Thank you. We'll definitely keep that in mind. Specifically about kind of like action scenes or scenes where there are lots of moving parts or moving people, are there any tips that you would give an aspiring editor or our editor?
I would say for action scenes and where there's a lot happening, things that have helped me in the past would be watching all of the rushes and asking myself, okay, what is the most important thing that's happening in the scene, and what does the audience need to know, because there might be a lot happening in the scene. And so say for example, someone's having a fight, and then there's another fight happening, or another, don't know if this will happen in swim, but say suddenly it does. There's a fight happening and there's another fight happening, and you need to decide which one, in production and from the camera perspective, which one you'd like to focus on and which one is important for the story. And also making it, I found that cutting quite quickly helps the pacing, and in terms of the pacing and the structure of how action scenes might happen, and also bring the audience along with you and build up the tension and then make it quite emotional, build up the tension and kind of keep them on the edge of their seats for the action scene. I found that cutting quite quickly and in like a bit of a rhythm has helped me in the past, and also focusing on who should be getting screen time here, in the sense of what is most helpful for the story, and like whose perspective is important that people need to know about.
Definitely, that's really useful. Do you have kind of like any other top tips, or what are the ABCs of editing?
Oh, the ABCs. That is a good question. I'd recommend checking out some books about editing. There's The Art of the Cut by Steve Hullfish, and he wrote a brilliant book, and it's basically structured as conversations with editors, and it's organized into different topics, and he's got some absolutely brilliant conversations that have provided some really helpful advice I found great over the time that I've been working in the industry. And in terms of what people should know on production, it's very helpful when you make sure that you slate every take, because what will happen in the edit is we'll be given the picture and the audio and we need to sync it up, and it just makes our lives a bit easier for when it's definitely been slated. And so then what we can do is we can literally just grab the picture, grab the audio, and just automatically put them together, and just making sure that in terms of documents and having editor logs is really helpful from the script supervisor. And so what that will involve is the editor will be given a list of all the scenes and takes that they've shot in that day, and there will be circle takes, which is when people just script supervisor will just circle a take that the director likes, the preferred take of the director, and then there'll also be some notes on the side of what happened in the take. So for example, this one was not good, someone flicked their eye, this one this one was great, there was a great performance, this one was okay, can be used, but the audio was it just didn't work halfway through, or just little things that the editor needs to know about, because then the editor can get all the rushes, get all the paperwork from the script supervisor, and have a look and go, okay, well, this one is the director's preferred, so I'll probably look at that first. And then I can also be aware of what's actually happened on set, all the other takes. And so creating any kind of paperwork like that, like script supervisor notes, continuity notes, is really helpful for the editor.
Definitely, there's definitely things that we should bring onto our production. What are kind of like the 3 most common things that you see going wrong in short films?
The slating thing, when people don't always do the clapperboard at the, it's just so helpful when we're in the edit, and just to be able to sync stuff up quickly, because then that means that we can get the film to, and the assemblies and the rushes for the day to the directors and producers faster. I think it's great when the director makes sure that there's enough coverage for a scene, because it's, when you're cutting together, you might have filmed a wide shot, for example, and it's very helpful to have different mid shots and close-ups and from different perspectives, because then in the edit it helps also cover edits if you need to cover something up, or also it gives them fuller, like more 3D perspective, and it helps the audience feel like they're in the scene, because we don't often, when you're watching 2 people talking, you're not often just like looking at them like this. You want to kind of be involved in what's happening, and so in film we can do that by giving the audience a better sense of what's happening from different perspectives. So yeah.
Amazing, thank you so much. And also, do you have any sort of recommended software or things like that that aspiring editors should use or try and get a hold of?
In the industry, we use Avid Media Composer. The first time I saw Avid Media Composer, I was like, what is this? I have never seen this before. No one told me about this. I'm so confused. But it does get easier to learn. So we use that in TV drama, film. There's also Premiere as well, which is great. And you don't need to use Avid. It's quite a learning curve. But that's good to know for future. But there's also DaVinci Resolve as well, which I believe is free. And so I'd honestly say anything that you've got to hand, or DaVinci.
Amazing, thank you. And just some final top tips for aspiring editors. What lingo do you think an editor would need to know before going into a cutting room, just to fit in?
For example, because I didn't actually go to university, a lot of the lingo I was very unsure of. And for my first runner job, we were given a test on different industries, pictures of different editing softwares and different terminology, and some of them I got right, most of them I got wrong. But what made a difference there was when I went to the manager and I asked him, I'd actually really like to learn what these are. And so it can be learned on the job. But just to give everyone a head start, there's quite a few different definitions of technical things, like edit decision lists, or names of processes that happen, for example, in the rushes phase, and then you have the fine cut, and then you have turnovers. And first, when I said to my mum, oh, we're doing turnovers at work today, she said, oh, like the pastry. Not quite, but maybe I should get some editors some pastries. That would work as well. And it's when we finish the film is locked, so it starts off when it's born and it's being shot, and then it's given to all the assistant editors, and we go through the rushes phase, and then all of the assemblies start happening when they assemble all the scenes together, and then it will go into the fine cut, which is when the directors and everyone's chatting and talking through things and just finalizing the picture, and then the picture will be locked, and then it will be turned over. So like you're passing something on to someone else by the assistant editors, and that is when we will basically turn over the picture, or the episode or the short film, to the VFX and the color grade departments and the online edit departments and the sound department within the next stage of post-production. So it's like we're sending it off, and it's then we have to go and find a job because our work is finished.
And finally, just bringing it back to swim, is there anything that we can all be doing now in terms of pre-production that will really help for post-production? Like, how much interaction should there be between like the DP and the editor, or kind of like pre-planning stuff, I guess?
I think as much as you would like, the more the better, I think, personally, just because when everyone's on the same page, it works really well. And you'll be able to flag, from the editor's perspective, you'll be able to flag up anything that you might think that you would like, or any queries you have. And the sooner you know them, the better, because especially with budget, you can think, okay, well, you might need to spend money on X, Y, and Z. And with the DP, yeah, I think it's as much collaboration as possible is the best thing, really, because then you can really think about, from the editor can be involved with the DP, and you can have conversations about shots and how they're going to cut together, and the coverage and what you need, and so then they can make sure that happens. And especially for music as well, if you have a composer, or you can discuss that, and especially in the edit, the editor will often put temp music on before it goes to the composer, just so you get a feel for the film or the show before it's actually sent off, so that the execs can watch it and go, okay, well, this works, and this is the kind of music we like the sound of this kind of works, this is not what we want, that kind of thing. And so then when everyone talks to each other and the sooner people come on board, then the easier the edit is, and the easier the film will go smoothly. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's funny actually hearing those last few answers, because we really wanted to ask questions about swim in particular, but it seems like you kind of touched upon each of the questions in tiny points. So I guess we could start with how you would work whilst editing, knowing that there's going to be a composer coming on to work with music. How personally do you find that process?
I find it a very good process to create temp music, and it can be things that you find on YouTube libraries, because it doesn't really have to be licensed, because as long as it doesn't go in the final film, because it's all temporary and it's all going to get removed, and then the composer will compose over it. But it's really helpful to have discussions, because the composer's not brought on yet. Temp music created, not created by the editor, but found by the editor and put into the film, will help discussions with the director and the producers, because then you can look at it and go, yeah, this is what we like, or no, this is not what we like. And so then it's easier for the composer, because then they can watch the film and get a feel for what's being done already, and go, okay, well, this is the feel that they want, and now I'm going to create my own piece of music. And having discussions with the editor and the composer together, and the director and the producer, just getting everyone in the same room and just having a chat about it, it really helps. It helps the flow of ideas and clear brief for the composer to happen.
How would you say you personally prepare to send an edit over to the composer? Is there a point where once you have the picture lock, you're happy to send it over? Or like you say, you work with temp music to see how the feel is with the film?
In TV, what we do, because the assistant editors are doing all the turnovers, which is also to the composer as well. I should mention that as well, not just the sound department. So what we do is in TV, the editor will be putting temp music on. And so what we then do is at some point when the composer is brought on, the composer will want to see the edit to see what's kind of temp music's been used. And so throughout the fine cut, before your act block, it's a good idea to start getting the composer involved and to start sending them over the latest cut of the edit so that they can get a feel for things and start thinking about ideas for what they'd like the music to be. And then once the picture's locked and you're in turnover season, yay, then what will happen is the composer will need, and this depends on what the composer would like, but usually they need a reference to watch with timecode, with burnt-in timecode. That's another lingo term, BITC, burnt-in timecode. So they need to know the timecode of the film, and it's really helpful from the edit perspective to always include the timecode, because then when you're sending over cuts, your latest cut to the director and the producer, because then they can go, well, at 10:00:02:07 or whatever it is, there was this thing that I'd like to change, and so then you can just go, okay, put it into your editing software, and really quickly you'll be able to make the notes because you know exactly where they'd like stuff. And so in the composer turnover, and that's the same actually for anything you send to anyone, always to include timecode at the bottom, because it will, what it does is it reference, you probably know this, but it will reference every single frame in the film will have a different timecode, and so you're really easily able to reference where something is. And so with the composer, they'll need a export of the film, like a H.264. If you wanted to be formatting technical, are great phrases. I would not recommend using those. And so yeah, so H.264 was of the film, just so that they have a reference. And then any temp music, what we do is we create a AAF, which is another type of file that you can export from editing software. And there's a lot of information online about it as well. And what it does, well, it will take your timeline with all the clips, and you can export it so that it will create an AAF. And when you import this file as an AAF into the whatever the composer's using, it will come up with all of the clips that you had in the editor's timeline, so that they can actually edit with them. And so what that will do is that will allow the composer to really work with the music that you've used, and just be able to, if there's things that they've already saved, for example, a composer has what's also helpful as well is, say a composer has a certain way of doing things, or a certain they've worked on things before and they've got some past music that they'd like you to already work with. That's always really helpful for the editor, because then they can get a bank of music from the composer that the composer might use in your film because they've used it in other films, or it helps the producers know the feel of what's the music's probably going to be like, and so then you can export that film and give it over to the composer, and if it's already got their music in it, it will literally allow them to edit their music that you've already put in the timeline, so they don't have to go and create a whole another piece of music.
It's great. It sounds like a process.
Yes.
I'm sure you'll see when Swim is finished, and if you get the chance to read the script, it's really dialogue heavy. And we wanted to know how you personally make dialogue scenes, one, more interesting, and two, how you decide to pace the scenes. Do you take a perspective of one character, or how does it work for you, would you say?
For me, I think I think about, okay, well, who in this scene, whose story is important, and so taking a perspective is quite helpful. And if you think about when you watch two people talking, and your head's going, yeah, okay, well, this person's talking and then they're talking, and you're just kind of going back and forth, the cut as if you are watching it. And so it's not, hello, how are you? Yeah, I am good. How are you? Yeah, I am fine. And so instead of cutting it like that, to cut it naturally as if you were watching the conversation, because your head when you're watching conversations probably just going, you're watching them talk and then you really want to see their reaction. But so a person is still talking, for example, and then but you're really wanting to see what's on B's face at the moment, because what they've said is just shocking or something, and so you want to watch their reaction. And so then your head is moving, and hopefully the edit would cut to actually see their reaction, if the audience or the person watching the conversation would want to see the reaction. So having a think about what the audience would like to see, and kind of taking that perspective in the film. And then sometimes dialogue needs to be reduced, but that's a conversation to have with the director and the producer and everything, because you will all naturally find out if that's something that has to happen, and so then you can all work to decide which parts, or if there's which parts need to be amended or edited or removed or just changed around in any way. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. So we have, I believe we're going to go into scene breakdown now. There's a tiny part of the script we took out and wanted to get your opinion of, and just kind of see how you would take this little scene and what you would do. I'm going to share the screen. Yeah.
What is this scene about in the film?
I can go for it. It's the whole script is about two sisters, and this is when the sisters have come back into the student accommodation of the older sister, and the older sister's cooking dinner for her younger sister.
Cool. Would you mind if I talk through it?
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so interior, here's kitchen 2 hours later. Thea finishes typing her last point. She closed the laptop, she runs her palms down her face, she looks tired. She goes in the kitchen and starts preparing dinner. It's really good that you've written montage of Thea cooking, because it's really helpful for the editor to then know what you'd like to do with it, and especially the soundscape of the cooking too. So if I was working with this scene, then I'd start thinking, okay, well, soundscape of cooking, what kind of cooking sounds do you need? Maybe a pot. Okay, she's making meatballs, seasoning them, rolling in her hands. You're probably going to need some sound effects like this. You can do that yourself and record it, or you can look at different sound libraries online. There's one called freesound.org, I believe, and just looking for free sound libraries as well. She's crushing garlic, so you might need some garlic crushing sounds. And yeah, they'll probably come in when you're actually filming, but you might need something that's a lot louder to actually sort that out with. And so any sounds in the kitchen, she's in the kitchen, so she might be able to hear, if she's living with neighbors, she might be able to hear some sounds from outside. She might she's closing the laptop, any kind of kitcheny sounds like a kettle boiling, something like that just happening in the scene as well. It's good to think about. And then cut to, please let me know if I'm pronouncing names wrong as well. So Cass,
I think.
Cass, cool. Cass sneaking out of Thea's room, down the stairs and out through the front door. Thea puts the pasta on to boil, calls for Cass, but doesn't wait for a response. So we've got an intercut there as well. And so in terms of pacing, perhaps you might want to see, while Thea has finished on her laptop and she's really tired and she's preparing dinner in the kitchen, you might wish in the edit to cut back and forth a little bit between Cass and Thea. So you might start with, and this is just personal opinion, there's no right or wrong way of doing things, and it's whatever you feel you'd like to do for the scene. But personally, what I would do is start off with Thea in the kitchen, and have that whole soundscape, and then cut between Kaz sneaking out of Thea's room, and then cut back to Thea in the kitchen to show that this is happening at the same time. And then Kaz is running downstairs and out through the front door. So we can watch her go out through the front door. Might possibly have a well, she's sneaking out, so I'm imagining that she's not going to be heard. And of course, Thea doesn't know that she's gone, because she's calling for her, but she's calling, but she's not there. So maybe just kind of cutting between Kaz walking out the door and then Thea calling out, and that's kind of happening at the same time, but she's already left. So yeah, and then 10 minutes later, Thea drains the pasta and plates up. She finds what she has made and carries 2 heaped bowls to the kitchen table. She calls for Cass again. When she doesn't respond, Thea goes upstairs to look for her. Cass isn't in her room or in the bathroom. Thea runs back downstairs and checks her phone. For this part, I'm gathering from the scene there's quite a lot of Thea perhaps might be a bit confused. And so one way that you could represent this in the edit is Thea's draining pasta, and you can follow her in that scene. And then she's calling out for Kaz, and she's checking in different rooms, and she isn't in her room or in the bathroom. So you could cut quite quickly between these two things, and through the camera you could there's loads of ways to do this, but one of the just ones that popped into my head is you can try and kind of, if you wished, you could kind of represent Thea's confusion of where is Cass through the camera, by moving the camera around, doing it from different angles, so that the audience also feels a little bit confused and doesn't really know where they are, and just quite kind of quickly cutting between Thea's looking in her room, and then Thea's looking in the bathroom, and Cass isn't there, and perhaps adding in some more things to really represent the fact that Cass is gone, no idea where Cass is. So then Thea runs back downstairs and checks her phone. There's a text from Cass: gone for a walk, took your pee, don't wait up. Thea tries to phone her, but Cass doesn't pick up. Thea covers one of the dishes with a plate, then sits down and pokes the food around a bit with a fork. She eats a bit, then leaves the table, puts her bowl in the sink, and goes upstairs. Shot on the pasta bowl covered with the plate, and the sound of Thea's bedroom door slamming shut. For the part where Thea has called Kaz and she's not replied, you could possibly have a cut into Cass not picking up, but that's dependent on whether you'd like that to be in the edit, and that's the conversation that you can all have, especially with the director, because it's it's their vision of their story, and the writer of what you want to put on screen. And so perhaps you would like Kaz's reaction to Thea trying to phone her, and then she's, oh no, I don't want to pick that up, and then cut back to Thea's reaction of not having that reply from Kaz, and then Thea covers one of the dishes with the plate, and she's sitting down, she leaves the table, and you could, with the camera work, you could try and represent Thea's frustration, because then she goes and slams the door, so she's obviously quite annoyed about this, I'm assuming from the text, from the script in the scene, and so you could kind of very much, as Thea is eating a bit and then leaves the table, puts a bowl in the sink, you could in the edit you could represent that frustration. It could be with when she's putting her bowl in the sink, she might, instead of just going, yeah, I've just put my bowl in the sink, she might like slam it down a little bit heavier, and in the sound you can have sounds that are a bit louder to kind of represent the anger or frustration, and then really following in on Thea's emotion, and instead of like a wide angle, perhaps her face, and you want to see her reaction, it's really up to you. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
No, that was amazing. I think that's all we have time for, actually. But thank you so much. Even like small things that I've never thought about, like making sure that like following the person's head in an edit, so you can hear the audio and watch someone's reaction whilst listening to it is like incredible. I hadn't thought of, so thank you so much. I'll stop my screen share now. But yeah, thank you so much for giving up your time, and we're really grateful, and it's been such a informative and interesting masterclass.
I hope it all goes well. It sounds like a really cool project, and let me know how it goes.